Evening all, Daniel Hand, RPG Therapist, and today we're going to have part 2 of our life cycle of RPGs double bill, in which we explore all the trials and tribulations that players, especially game masters, have to go through while the game itself is being played. Last week we looked at all the work that goes into preparing for the RPG. Now we're going to look at all the work that needs to go into actually keeping the thing running. Same disclaimer as last week. I appreciate these early videos might come across as somewhat negative, highlighting all of the difficulties of using RPGs in therapy without actually acknowledging any of the benefits. In truth, this was a conscious decision. I want to get all of the negativity done and out of the way so that the rest of the channel can focus on all the positive. So, you've got your game, you've got your gamers, you've got everyone organised-ish. What next? Well, first things first. If you haven't already done so, now's the time to choose a game master or GM. We mentioned last week that the magic number for RPGs tends to be 4 or 5 players. Of this number, one individual plays essentially the role of group leader, or if you will, the master/mistress of the game. This individual becomes responsible for managing the game/story's progress, ensuring that the other players know what they're doing, and keeping the group roughly on a steady course towards some form of conclusion, even if it's a tune in next time, asking for and adjudicating dice rolls, and generally doing all the behind the scenes work that other players don't truly appreciate the scope of. While not necessarily in charge, the GM is certainly a first among equals. Without them, there'd be no adventure for the other players to go on. The GM knows roughly what needs to happen next in the story. Their main job is to give the other players a space to find their own way to that next milestone. If you're at all familiar with the cliched image of an RPG group, the GM's the one behind the big cardboard screen, checking to see if dice rolls are successful and smiling knowingly when a player does something without thinking. Oh, and RPG therapists, beware. This is the job that 9 times out of 10, unless you're person-centered, you're going to be performing. We'll spend plenty of time walking through it, don't worry, but there's no getting around the fact that, as the practitioner in the room, you're the one who's going to have to do the lion's share of the work. Once the group has decided on a GM, and the GM is confident enough to get going, the next job, the first actual play, is for the players, with the exception of the GM, to create their characters. This task will vary massively in terms of complexity and time commitment, depending on the RPG you've decided to play. Even the simpler ones, though, will likely take an hour or so for everyone to complete. The first time I used an RPG with a client, I used a well-known game system, but it still took 2 whole sessions to complete the process. Regardless, the process is generally the same across the board. Each player takes a copy of the game's character sheet and, often with the help of the GM and each other, fills it out. This usually involves deciding things like the character's background, defining their personality and career or calling or class, basically the type of character they want to play, and generating/attributing scores for various abilities and skills. Some games go super detailed here, requiring decisions on just about every aspect of the character's pre-game life, to the point where a character can actually die before you finish filling out the character sheet. The players will live off this piece of paper. It's biography, instruction manual, and game record all rolled into one. My favourite character sheet by far is the one from Spectaculars. Each player gets a kind of tray which has a slot for the character sheet, and then they draw cards that contain information like the character's role or powers, and there's slots for them too. It's really quirky and I love it so much. The character creation process is usually at least a partially communal activity among the group. By collaborating with each other, the group can create a band of adventurers that possess a wide range of skills and should therefore be able to adapt to most situations that their adventure throws at them. This allows for a good amount of discussion and teamwork, making sure that nobody steps on anybody else's creative toes. It also gives the game master an idea of how this particular group of players might approach certain obstacles. If they're a very combat-oriented party, odds are they'll approach situations with violence, for example. Given how important this part of the cycle is to the RPG's quote-unquote success, it behoves everyone at the table to take their time, help each other, and plan ahead. Which, of course, means that character creation can take a good couple of hours all by itself. But when it's done, that is it. Within moments of the last player completing their sheet, the adventure is ready to begin. The GM, after hours of prep work, introduces the other players to the setting and points the adventurers in the direction of some sort of excitement. This, of course, requires confidence, not least in one's ability to tell a story. Scenes need to be described, events need to be narrated, non-player characters need to be brought to life in terms of both behaviour and speech. It can actually be quite nerve-wracking, especially for new GMs. These skills will be needed right the way through the game, yes, but here and now the GM has to dump a mountain of world building and exposition in a way that keeps the other players engaged. After the world and the upcoming story have been set up, the GM usually asks the players to introduce their respective characters and to determine when and how they all met. This can be plenty of fun for all involved, although it can also be quite easy for some players to dominate the game, leaving others to kind of linger in the background. And again, the GM is the one whose management skills can sometimes therefore be required right from the get-go. From here on out, the actual play part of the RPG settles into a steady cycle of GM says what's happening, players decide what to do, repeat. But that isn't to say that all the work is done. Because now, people on both sides of the GM screen need to pay attention and maintain meticulous records of what's happened in the story so far and where things are going to go next. The players need to keep track of where they've been, what they've done, what they still need to do, and this can include writing down every piece of information that the adventuring party comes across, especially apparently unimportant information spouted out by some random NPC, because you never know if that random piece of gossip is actually the key to an entire plotline. They'll also need to make sure that their character sheet stays up to date. Things like their health and conditions will constantly change, as will the list of items that they have about their person. Things like spells and special abilities will change, sometimes session by session, and whether or not they're still allowed to use them or if they've run out. It can be an awful lot to stay on top of. For their part, the GM has to ensure that the players know what they're doing at all times, keep track of the characters' movements and information, as well as having at least a rough idea of what might happen next. In spite of ostensibly being in control of the game, in fact the role of a GM is actually a very reactive one. Everything they do depends on the player's actions. And those actions will never be foreseeable by either the GM or the person who wrote the adventure. Which means that every time the players do anything, the GM has to completely rewrite what they plan to happen next. Professor Dungeon Master over on his channel makes a point of only ever planning 2 sessions ahead, simply because he has no idea what his players will do. And on top of all of this, everyone involved will have to keep checking and rechecking the rulebook for just about every new situation they find themselves in. A job that will often either fall to the game master or involve extensive discussion, or, both in either order. If you're playing online, you'll also have to get acquainted with the particular programs that you're using. And yet again, this will all depend on how simple or complex the game is. Short, straightforward scenarios with easy to remember rules will require much less record keeping or rules checking than an esoteric tome that demands epic storytelling. I played a short RuneQuest campaign a while ago, and I was too terrified of having to trawl through its incomprehensible text that I simply gave up trying to do things like cast magic, which is quite a big omission in a game where every character is supposed to be able to cast magic. These administrative tasks are a constant sidebar for the entirety of the game, and they really are a necessity. If GMs don't keep things moving, the players get bored. If players don't keep notes, it's unfair to ask the GM to do all the remembering. Of course, all of this is in service of the game and the act of enjoyment. Yes, there's a lot of paperwork, but there's also the fun, excitement, and camaraderie of the play itself. Telling the story, getting lost in a collective imagination, working as a team to overcome difficulties, rolling dice. That's what people play RPGs for. They're great. And those are the aspects of RPGs that this channel is going to spend the vast majority of its time exploring, now that we've finally gotten all of this negativity out of the way. I hope, though, that now you can see where I'm coming from when I talk about how difficult it can be to apply traditional RPGs to what most of us think as traditional therapy sessions. In fact, it's actually usually much easier to apply the therapy to the RPG by working with a group of clients rather than one-to-one, offering longer sessions, and essentially just playing a regular RPG, occasionally using it as a conversation prompt. But this really isn't how most of us work, so we need to approach things a little differently. So what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments if you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, that this all seems perfectly straightforward, or, if you agree that this is all a bit much to put our clients through. Let's get that conversation started. My book, Role-Playing Games and Psychotherapy, A Practitioner's Guide, is available wherever you get your reading material. If you're interested in becoming an RPG therapist, that's a great place to start, link below. You can also sign up for my monthly-ish RPG therapy newsletter, Handwriting, again, link below. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, either with thoughts on the channel, with a view to getting some RPG therapy training, or even if you're a prospective client looking to start therapy, you can find me at my website, monomythcounselling.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you. Everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, subscribe, share, click the bell icon, do all the YouTubey things, and I'll speak to you next week. So take it easy, have a good one, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Cheers.